So it's lesson 3 of server-side scripting. We've kicked off our music store. So here's kind of how we left it off last week. So 2 weeks ago, we just looked at creating a simple view with some static content. Last week, we hard-coded in, we mocked up a few products. We didn't even really mock them. We just stuck the HTML on here. And we made each product a link where we could click. And through the URL, we just added a parameter on. And we used the view bag. So we basically stuck this value in the view bag. If I open up my store controller, we stuck this value, passed it in as a parameter, stuck it in the view bag in our controller. And then over here in our product view, we could reach into the view bag and display it. So that's kind of where we left off. So just to talk about a couple things from the quiz related to the view bag, right? We do this and try that. Visual Studio is already not happy, right? Virginia put a space in there. So we get this. Or even if you had written it in example piano case, that object doesn't exist. It's only view bag in Pascal case that makes sense. Visual Studio. Yeah, because view bag's a built-in. It's a built-in class. It's part of the .NET framework. Right? If I go to the definition, it's a property of the web page view that's in system.web.mvc. So you can't change it. View bag is created by Microsoft. We're just using that object. We're not defining it ourselves. Right? So we've got a file. And notice everything's in Pascal case. And just to show you here, if I do this, let's say I take my name. If I want to write it this way, Visual Studio is not happy. It doesn't give me a red, but if I name it without a capital letter to start, must begin with an uppercase, and I've violated the naming rules. So if you want to create variable names, variables and arrays, those you can name any way you want. But method names, classes, it wants them in Pascal case, or Visual Studio will complain. So last week we used this controller. We used the view bag to pass a single value. Typically, that's what we use the view bag for. We want to display an error message, or maybe we're fetching a list of data. We're going to send back the list in a different way, but maybe we also want to send back a value, for example, indicating how many items are in that list. It's like a search page. So something like, we go here. So let's say we run a query. We might fetch a list of results to send to the view. But here we've got the number of results returned. Well, that might be a simple thing. We just count how many records we got. We stick the count in a property in the view bag, and then above our list, we can display the number of records we got. So that might be a common use of where we might use view bag.
Tell you how many results you get, but it'll cut you off after like 50 pages.
Yeah, because after that it's not relevant anymore. Yeah, so the indexing becomes too.
It's true. I can't even go past 3. Let's see if I go to 3.
But you can,
It'll keep going.
you can go
Yeah.
to the URL and change that.
Yeah, that's right. I could also, that's right.
PG20.
Yeah, I could go here.
But I guess that might be.
So yeah, I could go here. Actually, let's see. I might also be able to change the, I may be able to change the page size. Oh, here, because it's not just there.
Yeah. because they were only.
Yeah.
It doesn't even go through all of them.
That's super user friendly.
Right?
All right. So we've passed a single value from the controller to the view with ViewBag. ViewBag is kind of, I like to think of it as, it's like a really quick and dirty container. Here's some information in the controller. Here you go, stick in the ViewBag, shuffle it off to the view. It's not really structured. And we don't typically use it for sending things other than single values. Like just a simple message, simple number, something like that. If we have like a list or a collection of data, we're generally not going to use the ViewBag to pass that from the controller to the view. We will now, but we'll just do it for starters, and then we'll do it in a more structured way. So let's make a new controller. So let's add a controller. We're going to have to pick an empty controller. Eventually, we're going to get to MVC5 controllers with views, but not today. Not until we have our database all connected in. We'll pick an empty controller. Let's just call this, we'll call it the albums controller. We'll probably delete this file and overwrite it next week because we want to actually connect this to an album table in the database. We're just going to kind of mock it up for today. So albums, make sure it's plural. So that way the URL will load at localhost/albums. It follows the pattern. Question? Ally?
Yeah, I've got a question. You mentioned about the pluralization of controllers.
Yep.
Why is then
Fair question. Two reasons. One is it's convention, not a rule. So you can see, for example, we have the home controller. But typically, most of our controllers handle the logic, all the logic related to one table in the database. So as you mentioned, typically we're working with a collection of data that we're going to read, create, update, and delete. So for our store, it's a little more generic. That could be anything. I just kind of created that as an example. So typically, we'll base them, each controller will be based on a database table where we're working with a collection of data. So it automatically generates an index view for us. So what we're going to do is rather than generating an actual album class out of our database, we're going to do that next week. For today, we're just going to make up a mock class. It'll be a really simple class. So it'll look much like a Java class. So we'll come back to our controller in a minute. If you right-click your models folder, we're going to add, you can either pick new item from this context menu, or the last option down here is add class. I'm going to pick add class. If you pick new item, class is then the first option you get, or you can just go directly to choose add class. So I'll leave this up for a minute so you can see the path. Right-click the models folder, add class. If you chose new item, then class is the first item in this list. So either way you get to it is okay. So let's call this album. You don't need an extension. It'll automatically get a CS extension. And just like a Java class, in the .NET world, our models are generally singular because it's representing one instance of this particular business object. Okay. So I'll call it album singular, and it's Pascal case, so it's capital A, and the rest lowercase. So here we get a class, and notice because our file lives in the models folder, it's part of a separate namespace. So this is part of the models namespace. You can imagine our controller, as it's in the controllers folder, it's part of the controller's namespace. So this is a way MVC organizes our code. All the models are in one namespace, all the controllers are in a separate namespace. So here we'll just create a simple property. I'll make it again, Pascal case with a capital T. Let's make it readable and writable. So almost exactly how you would do it if you were creating an album object in Java. Right? Nothing new here. The public modifier is really important. No, it doesn't have to be. Yeah. It's basically referencing the system.string library here. If I mouse over, it tells me where to find it. It's in system.string. If you use a capital S, it will work fine. Yeah, basically it's an alias for, as you can see, the system.string with the capital. Good question. Okay. But the public is key. Without that scope, we can't access this property from our controller or our view or anywhere else. I learned this the hard way this morning. I told you guys to get the better lesson because I forgot public and then couldn't figure out why we couldn't find the title in the controller. So now in here, we're going to create mock list album. I'm going to create a variable called albums. We'll talk about the keyword var in a minute, which I hate, but it has made a comeback, much to my chagrin. So here's how we instantiate a list in the .NET world. We make a new list. We want this list to contain strongly typed objects. We just identify the type of object here. So it could be a string, integer, date, or our own custom object. That's what we want here. We want a list of our own album objects that inherit. So every item in the list will have all the properties and methods of an album. So Visual Studio is not very happy with us. So these little hints are really useful. So it doesn't know what an album is, so it makes a few suggestions. Do we want to generate an album class, or do we just want to reference the model namespace because the model namespace does contain an album class? So 8 times out of 10, the first suggestion in this code hint will solve your problem. So if you ever don't know how to solve the problem, when you get this little code hint by mousing over, try the first one. Most of the time, that's going to make your error go away. So I'll just double click that. And notice on line 1, it now adds a reference to the model's namespace. Album turns blue, our red error goes away. So in order to access the album class, we've got to reference the model namespace, because our album is inside of models. So most of the time, pretty much all our controllers are going to reference the model namespace, because every controller is going to need to interact with a model that works with that same table in the database. We'll talk about var for a minute. I hate var. var went away for a long time. When I started this industry, we declared variables often with var. And it used to be when you did that, it would mean that the data type, so you used to be able to do something like this. You know, var x equals new object. So object was kind of a generic, like, parent data type that all the other data types inherited from. So if you weren't sure what type of data you wanted, you could just declare it as var, and it would be this kind of amorphous object type that had no particular properties or method. And then wisely, Microsoft got rid of var, and they said, we don't want var anymore. It's too vague. It's too fuzzy. We want everything to be explicitly typed. And then for some reason, a few years ago, they had a change of heart and said, no, var is going to make a comeback, but it's come back in a different form. var no longer means an untyped object. What var means here is that at runtime, or even at design time, the .NET interpreter is going to try to infer the data type. So if we create a list of type album, this is generally smart enough to know that's what we have, that we have a strongly typed list with all the properties and methods of albums. I'm not really crazy about this structure, but I use it because you're going to see it everywhere. With, you know, this probably anything written in .NET in the last at least 5 years, you'll see lists declared this way. For single objects, we'll still declare them with a particular type, but we'll particularly see this when we're creating lists. We'll see var, and we'll just have faith that the Microsoft gods will interpret that list to be the right data type. It does tend to work. I really don't like the structure of it, but that's kind of what they've stuck us with. So if you don't like using var and you can find a better alternative that you find is a little more descriptive, knock yourself out. If it works, great, share it with the rest of us. But so far, we'll use var until we find something better. All right. It's about 10-2. I can't remember. I got so many sections I've lost. Are we doing one break or two? Two? All right. Take a break.